I vow to trace and execute criminals who committed confirmed acts of treason.
In the early hours of the morning, the Academy Guardians called a meeting in the common room. Most trainees arrived in their pajamas, their hair disheveled and their eyes half shut. They noticed YAHSHI's bandages and the absence of dice, but didn't ask any questions. Commander Roz broke the silence with a dreary announcement.
The entire Bayan family, including Dice, went missing last night. We believe there may be false converts spying for the underground.
We're lucky YAHSHI saw Dice through the window last night. If he hadn't confronted him, Dice would still be here, hiding amongst us.
Still, the 12 remaining trainees were speechless. It became clear that the stress of their sparring matches and exams at the Academy were minuscule in comparison to the stress they would face as full-fledged guardians. The underground truly was always one step ahead of the Force. The rebels were brewing something terrible, and the 5 graduates would be responsible for facing it. Most of them barely remembered the Atheris War and had grown up watching Guardians work during an era of peace. But during war, would the job be as desirable and glamorous? Would the family pension and bonus infrastructure revenue possibly justify the personal cost? Pinto didn't show up for breakfast. YAHSHI and VELL assumed he needed time alone to process the news, but his absence during their morning classes worried them. They skipped lunch to stop by the lobby, Pinto's living quarter, rooms of instruction, the infirmary, and finally, the common room. He was nowhere in the building, so they headed outside. The courtyard and field were empty. They combed through the surrounding woods for about 10 minutes before they spotted him. Pinto was sitting on the grass, his back against the exterior wall of the stable. He stared at the woods, his face sickeningly pale. VELL sat next to him.
What's wrong?
You can go.
He nearly said more, but his trembling lower lip stopped him. He gripped the fabric of his vest as he lurched forward, sobbing silently. The underground had infiltrated the Force's selective military program, proof that they were planning to strike. It was eye-gouging last time. What next?
You don't have to push us away.
VELL wrapped her arm around him.
You can let us care.
Pinto inhaled a few stifled breaths before leaning into her shoulder. He cried as though he had lost his eye right then and there, as though he were reliving the memory. VELL ran her hand along his curls, but YAHSHI could only watch. For the next week, Pinto spent his recreation time in the woods, shooting arrows at trees for hours. He volunteered to perform first for their primary tool filtration, and Commander Roz explained that he would have 3 chances to hit the bullseye. Pinto drew his bow and stared at the target as though it were a traitor. The arrow struck the bullseye, and YAHSHI flinched.
Wonderfully done.
A boy named Brasher Mars failed the filtration, butchering the moves in a dual sword sequence Commander Roz had assigned them. Unlike those filtered before him, Brasher smiled and said goodbye to the 11 remaining trainees. He patted YAHSHI on the shoulder as though they were friends, but they had only spoken briefly once or twice. YAHSHI speculated that Brasher had botched the sequence on purpose, as he had seen him perform it perfectly during practice the day before. As Pinto ate dinner, YAHSHI watched him like a hawk. His shoulders tensed up whenever Pinto met his gaze. YAHSHI left the table without a word and headed to the library, where he paced back and forth between 2 bookshelves.
Instead of questioning where my parents were from, Dice questioned where my father was from. He also recognized the sky weeps with us. But strangest of all, he knows that father didn't want me to accept my selection. If there's a link between my parents and the Bayans, father can be in serious danger, and I'd be dragged right into it.
He thought of their criminal matching filtration and shivered. The door creaked open.
YAHSHI?
He stepped out of the aisle and waved.
Is something wrong?
VELL made her way toward him.
Why do you ask?
You ran off during supper. I understand why Pinto's been acting strange, but I never expected this from you. You've been so distant lately.
Well, I didn't mean to be. I'm just stressed.
Stressed about what? Talk to me.
YAHSHI wished he could tell her everything, but he knew the consequences of speaking his mind recklessly. He had come too far to fall back into old habits.
It's not worth it.
So instead of telling her about Dice, he hugged her.
Thank you, but really, I'm okay.
He hoped that somehow she could tell he was lying. Despite Pinto's daily inquiries, Professor EMBRE never provided any new information about the Bayans. VELL's attempts to encourage him to move on only added wood to the fire. They had seen this side of Pinto before, appearing for scattered moments here and there, but this was different. His frustration had taken over him completely. 32 days passed before Dr. Blummery wheeled a second cart of rabbits into the lab. He slid one box in front of each trainee as he made his way down the aisle, Professor EMBRE trailing behind him with her chin held high.
I know the recent weeks have been a challenge for you kids. It's clear that the underground is planning something, but moping around isn't going to fix that.
In today's filtration, we'll be testing your restraint. Guardians face challenges that require quick yet thoughtful solutions. To make the right moves under pressure, it's crucial to resist emotional interference.
Dr. Blummery stopped the cart by his desk.
Box is open!
YAHSHI opened the box in front of him. Inside was a rabbit and a dagger.
You kids know the drill. You fail this test, we send you home.
Dr. Blummery clicked a button on his stopwatch.
You have 5 minutes to kill a rabbit.
YAHSHI's face burned, but he had no right to be angry. He knew the Guardians dealt with the most dangerous criminals on the island, a responsibility which required composure. But despite this knowledge, he had never fully processed the fact that the Guardians sometimes had to kill.
4 minutes!
As YAHSHI grappled with this heavy realization, Limbo made the first move, lifting the rabbit out of his box. It was trembling and drooling, injected with Belladonna for an effortless kill. YAHSHI watched in horror as Limbo pinned the rabbit down with one hand and raised the dagger with the other. After taking a deep breath, he brought the blade through its neck. YAHSHI's stomach churned as blood dripped from the table, forming a puddle around Limbo's boots. SUNNA looked away.
For the love of... I'm gonna be sick.
Limbo yanked the dagger out of the rabbit. He turned to Professor EMBRE and Dr. Blummery, his grip on the handle tightening.
There! Is that what you want?
Thank you, Limbo.
You're welcome, Professor. You are so welcome for mindlessly taking a life.
Dr. Blummery looked up anxiously from his stopwatch, but he said nothing.
Thank you, Limbo. You're dismissed.
Excuse me?
You're filtered from the program.
I'm filtered? For what? Not killing a bunny with a smile on my face? I'm filtered for showing even an ounce of empathy. This rabbit isn't a traitor to the Vakoi Empire. It's not a spy for the underground. It's just a bunny, Professor.
That's true. It's just a bunny.
You can't filter him. He did what you asked.
Drop it, Salem.
You know what? I'm out. I'm filtering myself from the program. If this is what it means to be a Guardian, then I want no part of it.
You've been filtered. A Guardian is waiting in the common room to escort you home. Leave now, Limbo. Don't test me.
Limbo tossed his dagger at the floor with a grunt. The trainees scuffled away as he stormed down the aisle, leaving a trail of scarlet footprints behind him.
Please, Professor!
One more word out of you, and you'll leave with your brother.
When Salen opened his mouth to further protest, Limbo cut him off.
You heard her. Not another word.
He stopped at the door and looked back at his brother.
If this is your path, then by all means, follow it. But it's not mine.
And with the slam of a door, Limbo was gone. The dripping of blood from the table echoed in the silence.
3 minutes.
Limbo's filtration had proven that to pass the test, they must not only complete the task, but also remain calm while doing so. YAHSHI held a blank expression as he removed the rabbit from his box and grabbed the dagger. He brought the blade to the animal's neck, but despite his determination, his arm stopped against its will as though someone had snatched it.
Like Limbo said, it's just a bunny, and the bunny did nothing wrong.
Struggling to make the kill, YAHSHI took a breather to observe the others. He saw Pinto decapitate his rabbit and cringe as blood spilled over his palms. Next to him, VELL located her rabbit's heart and stabbed it quickly, removing the blade with her palms clean. When QUAX punctured his rabbit's stomach, it struggled in pain, but a few extra stabs finished the job.
2 minutes.
If you completed the task, wash your hands in the infirmary and enjoy a break before lunch.
Salen looked back. He closed his eyes with an exhale before swiping the dagger from his table and impaling his rabbit. Behind him, SUNNA set his bloody dagger on the table post-kill, struggling to steady his breaths. The task had moved him, but not strongly enough to fail the filtration.
1 minute.
YAHSHI stood tall, knowing what he had to do.
I won't let a bunny stop me from winning.
With a firm push, he brought the blade through the rabbit's neck, and warm blood began to cover his hands like a pair of mittens. 4 trainees, including Limbo, had failed the restraint filtration due to losing control of their emotions or refusing to kill their rabbit. Only 7 trainees remained in the program, and of those 7, only 5 had the willpower to show up for lunch. The dining hall felt emptier than ever. VELL didn't bother testing YAHSHI's Belladonna detection skills. She took a few bites of her bread roll before leaning back, watching raindrops race down the window. It was storming outside, the clouds darker than charcoal. YAHSHI nearly asked her if she was feeling okay when Pinto broke the silence.
Look, he's out there again.
The rain made it hard to see, but in the distance, a trainee was pushing a cart of wooden boxes across the field.
He's been slipping, hasn't he?
It was only a matter of time.
KO's voice brought YAHSHI's attention to the only other occupied table.
QUAX, we should talk to him. At this rate, he'll get himself filtered.
Maybe it's better that way. Let's face it, SUNNA doesn't like the program. He never has.
Without thinking, YAHSHI jumped to his feet. Pinto and VELL questioned him as he ran from the table, but their voices muddled together, and he didn't hear a word. He bolted into the common room, out the front door, and around the building. When he caught up to SUNNA in the field, he dropped to one knee and dug into the wet dirt with his hands, helping him deepen the grave. SUNNA took the first box off the cart and removed the dead rabbit inside. His face contorted as he began to cry, and YAHSHI bit his lip to keep from crying too. Not for the rabbits, but for SUNNA. He understood how awful it was to go down a rabbit hole, asking questions no one else did, feeling alone in perspective and thought. He wouldn't wish that on anyone. They packed the hole with cold rabbits. Blood covered their calloused palms, but it had to be done. Someone had to do the dirty work. When they completed the burial, their clothes were covered in mud. They stared down at the heaping pile of dirt as rain washed the blood from their hands.
Do you ever wonder if you'd be happier back home?
When YAHSHI turned to face him, he was almost certain he was staring into the eyes of a ghost. After lunch, Commander Roz called a gathering in the lobby to announce their updated living arrangements. With only 7 trainees remaining and 10 available quarters, there was no need for roommates anymore. YAHSHI stood in the middle of his quarter, his clothes still muddy and damp. He watched Pinto clear out his drawers and stack his fresh uniforms, preparing to move into one of the empty rooms. Ever since Dice ran off, Pinto had been drifting further and further away, and YAHSHI couldn't help but feel as though this was the grand finale. Pinto stopped at the door and looked back.
Are you okay?
I'm fine. I felt bad for Sunna, that's all.
Pinto nodded before leaving their shared quarter for the last time. YAHSHI showered and changed into a fresh uniform. When the bell rang for defense class, he waited for the footsteps of his fellow trainees to disappear before entering the lobby. He sat on a sofa, plucked a pawn from a chessboard, and rolled the wooden piece between his thumb and forefinger. It was only a matter of time before the Guardians would trace the Bayans, and YAHSHI couldn't shake his paranoia about their potential connection to Martu.
What could I possibly do? It's not like I could leave the grounds to speak to Father about this.
A corridor door creaked open. YAHSHI looked up at VELL, who seemed equally surprised to find him skipping class. Her eyes were red.
Hi.
YAHSHI raised his hand in a brief wave. VELL took a seat next to him. He set the pawn down, and when he faced her again, she quickly wiped a tear from her cheek. Her hands trembled as she folded them in her lap.
I can't do this any longer.
YAHSHI frowned.
What do you mean?
I'm filtering myself from the program.
VELL leaned forward, using her hair to shield her face.
I'm done.
Hey, I know that the bunnies...
This isn't about that. YAHSHI. There's a reason why I have so much knowledge about Belladonna.
You read about it in books.
Not just books. Without enough money for my mother's medicine, my father and I took desperate measures.
Belladonna only grows in the city hospital's lab.
You can find it elsewhere if you know where to look, or who to ask. For a certain type, there's an element of thrill to the plant's effects. When I read about its medicinal benefits, my father made some connections and bought a few potted plants from a drug dealer.
VELL traced a finger along the lines in her palm as she recalled the memory.
While my father worked, I skipped classes to stay home and take care of my mother. I read every medical book I could get my hands on and started to experiment with the plant. As you know, even our skin absorbs the toxins. It caused rashes at first, but eventually, nothing.
She finally faced him again.
I've been unintentionally building a tolerance all this time.
VELL? Why were you selected?
You can't repeat this. To no one. Ever.
I promise.
VELL nodded, affirming that she believed him.
Someone reported my father. We never found out who. It was selection season at the time, so Dr. Blim was available to investigate. He burst into our home unannounced and caught me with belladonna berries in my hand. He could have detained my father and I that day, but when he saw my mother in bed, he started to ask me questions about her condition, then about belladonna and general knowledge of medicine. It was like he was testing me. He gave me this long stare and then he just left. A few weeks later, I was selected. Dr. Blimmery broke protocol and even vouched for my selection. He shouldn't have done that. If anyone finds out, it's game over.
VELL's eyes widened before she buried her face in her hands, muffling her voice.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that.
YAHSHI wrapped his arm around her and pulled her closer. There was no hesitation. Unlike his choice to kill the rabbit, he had done so without thinking, and it shocked him how naturally he had chosen to support VELL, despite the treasonous information she'd revealed. He could have easily turned on her and Dr. Blummery, but the idea appeared only as a ridiculous afterthought.
It's okay. I'm on your side. Alright?
YAHSHI recognized that he and VELL had both been paranoid, and it was threatening their success in the program. They were allowing fear to take over their choices.
Filtering yourself isn't the answer, VELL. You've already made it this far without anyone finding out. And I won't tell a soul.
Not even Pinto?
Especially not Pinto.
YAHSHI closed his eyes, bracing himself.
I have something to tell you too. It's about Dice. And my father.
Belladonna, Book 1, Nightshade Academy. Written and narrated by Mel Torrefranca. Produced by Mel Torrefranca and Wilson Hensley. Edited and mastered by Juan Pablo Diaz.
How did we get here? Something went wrong. We worked hard for this life that we don't want at all.
Cover art by Mad Studio. Score by Gita Puspita Asri. Theme song composed and produced by James Sinclair-Stott. Starring Jason Brown, Anthony Andreas Echeverri, Philip Kryanov, Melissa White, Alex Bowie, Patrick Vierzba, Julia Ristow, David John Bors, Connor Blunck, Kody Kiehl, Ellie Chua, Ben Autry, Walter Mack.
If it's really true that the sky weeps with us, if it's really true that heroes live in stars.
Featuring the voices of Gwyneth Evans, Jeff Rosenau, Lucas Hensley, Levi Titus, Angie Eggers, Willem Degar, Allison Prophet, Maria Palmo. Nightshade Academy is produced in association with Lost Island Press.
If it's really true, if it's really true. If it's really true, if it's really true. If it's really true, if it's really true. If it's really true, if it's really true.